Robert Redford was one of the last links to the golden age of Hollywood.
Robert Redford died today at age 89 at his sprawling ranch in Utah.
He was Hollywood's golden rebel, the man who turned quiet roles into legends and a canyon into a cultural empire. But when Robert Redford took his final bow, the world discovered a side of him few had ever seen.
His wife released a recent photo along with this statement. Robert Redford passed away at his home at Sundance in the mountains of Utah, the place he loved, surrounded by those he loved. He will be missed greatly.
Behind the camera, beyond the spotlight, he had built something vast, layered, and astonishing, so valuable it could reshape his family's future overnight. What hidden choices fueled this fortune, and why does one piece of it remain more powerful than money itself? The Last Sunrise at Sundance. On September 16, 2025, Robert Redford died at 89 in his beloved home in Sundance, Utah. The sanctuary he built there, a house blending into the Wasatch landscape, became the stage for his final chapter. For the world, he was a cinematic titan. For his family, his passing meant inheriting not only grief, but a vast and complicated legacy. Redford's career defined American cinema. He was the outlaw hero of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the truth-seeking journalist of All the President's Men, and the Oscar-winning director of Ordinary People. Yet, beyond the screen, he was a conservationist and founder of the Sundance Institute and Film Festival, building a cultural brand as enduring as his performances. The family he left behind now becomes the stewards of that legacy. His wife, artist Sibylle Sagers, whom he married in 2009, had shared more than 2 decades with him. His daughters, Shauna and Amy, survive him, while his 2 sons, Scott and James, tragically passed earlier in life. This family constellation matters. Inheritance and responsibility will now fall largely to his wife and daughters. The initial media response celebrated Redford's career. Tributes came from co-stars, protégés, politicians, and the Sundance Film Festival itself. Yet beneath the praise, attention quickly turned to his estate. A man who prided himself on independence, from studios, glamour, and traditional wealth, was suddenly reduced to financial figures. Those figures are quite significant. The estimation seems to be a mere $20 million or more in holdings in real estate, including his retreat in Utah, a house in California, and a getaway in Napa, among others. Then again, there are royalties, art, Native American artifacts, and the Living Sundance brand. It's getting more extensive. The family now has to decide what they will keep and what they won't. Will the Sundance home just be part of the family heritage? Is the art collection intact or going to be diluted among collectors? What about his daughters, who are both arts-related, to consider the emotions versus dealing with this huge fortune? These are the last things one expects to write about in flowery memorials, but they inevitably come after such a life. The estate is not merely about money, but meaning. After all, what would Redford's estate be without meaning behind it? It is Sundance that for him and the family means that place and that festival, an intersection of art, independence, and environmental stewardship. To them, it is both material and symbolic weight. It is the last sunrise at Sundance that most clearly defines the double-edged nature of this reality. It was home, vision, and brand for Redford. For his family, it is now one of responsibility, emotional and financial. Their decisions will forever influence the way the world will remember not just Redford the actor or director, but Redford the founder, activist, and steward. His death, then, is not an ending so much as a pivot. September 16th closed one chapter, but opened another. This one defines how his family must navigate grief, history, and wealth all at once. If the first hint of his fortune was the home in Provo Canyon, the deeper tale lies in what he chose to preserve: land, art, and ideals. The Redfords now inherit not just land, but the weight of a legacy, that of perhaps Hollywood's most timeless reputation for protection or redefinition. The house on the hill was only a clue. The real story starts with the canyon he once bought to protect. A canyon, a vision, a brand. In 1969, Robert Redford purchased a quiet stretch of land in Utah's Provo Canyon. To outsiders, it looked like an actor's retreat, but Redford was planting a seed that would grow into one of the most influential cultural brands of the modern era. This was the beginning of Sundance, part home, part sanctuary, and eventually a global symbol of independent filmmaking. Redford often said he wanted a place that resisted Hollywood's machinery, where art and nature could coexist. Instead of sprawling resorts or luxury mansions, he built small rustic structures that blended into the mountainside. Sundance was never meant to be an escape from work, but a redefinition of it, a creative hub where artists could breathe, experiment, and create without the pressure of box office demands. What began as a patch of wilderness became a cultural anchor. In 1989, Architectural Digest offered the public its first glimpse inside Redford's vision. The feature showcased his home, Native American artifacts, minimalist furniture, and wide windows that framed the canyon like artwork. More than aesthetic, this was an economic strategy. By curating Sundance as authentic, natural, and creative, Redford transformed real estate into a story, and story into value. The canyon itself became a brand. That vision expanded in 1981 with the creation of the Sundance Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to nurturing independent filmmakers through labs, mentorship, and funding. 4 years later, the Sundance Film Festival launched in Park City. Initially modest, the festival quickly grew into a cinematic landmark, providing breakthroughs for directors like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and Damien Chazelle. Each January, Utah became the epicenter of film culture, where studios scouted talent and investors sought the next phenomenon. The brilliance of Redford's design was how inseparable place and purpose became. Sundance carried weight not only because of the festival, but because it was rooted in an actual canyon and philosophy. Independence, experimentation, and authenticity weren't marketing slogans. They were embedded in the land itself. This cultural identity magnified financial value. A cabin was no longer just a cabin, it was a piece of cinematic history. An acre wasn't just land, it was the soil of artistic freedom. By the 1990s, this place had become a full ecosystem. It had become a film festival, a nonprofit institute, a resort, a catalog company, and even a clothing line, all under the Sundance label. The Utah land had become much more than mere real estate. It became the gravitational center of a lifestyle. It has attracted not only filmmakers and technical personnel, but also audiences and a new breed of consumers, the authentic lifestyle that Redford created over the years. From the standard Hollywood expansion, Sundance has stood intact by its founding principle: protect the land, elevate the art. Financially, the results were impressive. Every cabin saved, every acre shielded, every program launched added layers of intangible and tangible value. While Hollywood measured success around the cash a movie made at the box office, here was Redford, building an empire with the latter, whose currencies were prestige, independence, and influence. The canyon served as both a gate and a factory. A gate to protect the integrity of the independent film, and a factory to produce culture, celebrity, and eventually wealth. Striking about this legacy is that Redford never saw it from a money point of view. The canyon symbolized something, that storytelling required a space to thrive that would be free from the known constraints of commerce and conformity. Then there is Sundance, a perfect case of cultural capital turned into financial capital. Over the years, a brand based in the wilderness carried much more weight than dozens of studio franchises. Therefore, Redford's 1969 purchase was entirely not whimsical or impulsive. It was visionary. He chartered land and cultivated an idea that stood the test of time. Sundance remains one of those rare Hollywood brands that sprouted not from the stage, but from the soil, where canyon became vision and vision became legacy. But the canyon's most valuable chapter came after Redford let the ski resort go. The resort he sold. For decades, the heart of Robert Redford's Utah legacy was the Sundance Mountain Resort. Unlike Aspen or Vail, it was never meant to dazzle with glittering hotels or celebrity exclusivity. Redford built a retreat where skiing met culture, where mountain slopes doubled as gathering places for artists and film screenings. By the late 20th century, it had become both a skier's haven and a cultural landmark. So when Redford announced in 2020 that he was selling it, many assumed it was a straightforward cash-out. It wasn't. At 84, Redford could have maximized profit by handing over 2,600 acres of prime alpine property to developers eager to carve it up. Instead, he crafted a deal that revealed where his priorities lay. The buyers, Broadreach Capital Partners and Cedar Capital Partners, were seasoned global investors in hospitality. Yet Redford set terms that ensured the land's character and his principles would endure. The boldest term was a sweeping conservation easement. Of the resort's 2,600 acres, 1,845 were permanently protected from development. No hotels, no condos, no sprawling subdivisions, ever. In effect, Redford limited his own payday to guarantee the canyon's integrity. Developers could operate the resort, but only within cultural and ecological boundaries he deemed essential. Critics called it financially short-sighted. Why cap the potential of land worth hundreds of millions? But for Redford, this was the final act in a decades-long performance, safeguarding Sundance from becoming another overbuilt ski playground. This place was never about making a killing, he said. It was about what we could preserve. The sale became less a transaction than a statement, an estate plan wrapped in philosophy. Yet it was not pure idealism. The deal was also shrewd. By relinquishing ownership, Redford freed himself from operational burdens, staffing, maintenance, liability, while reaping a significant financial return. Though the exact price was never disclosed, analysts estimated the sale reached comfortably into the hundreds of millions. Redford gained liquidity late in life, while locking the resort's future into a conservation framework. He had exchanged day-to-day control for long-term influence. For the heirs, the consequences proved empirical, because the resort was no longer to be inherited as a complicated, high-maintenance property. Rather, the profits from selling out became liquid wealth, cash, by which the heirs had easier means of handling, investing, and disbursing through trusts. By changing a massive, inviolable asset into cash, Redford averted the possibility of family disputes and ensured that his legacy would be less complex to sustain. More than this, however, might be the cultural consequence. By putting conservation into the sale itself, Redford attached the Sundance brand as tightly as the land with regard to the construct. Guests would still relate the resort to his values: art, authenticity, environmental stewardship, even when he no longer possessed the deed. That continuity is as symbolic as it is real in weight, being the reinforcement of the Redford name and shielding it in prestige for his family's inheritance. In that sense, the 2020 sale was a stroke of genius, awakening Redford in his ability to let go of property and let go of meaning. He turned property into principle and money into message. The family may no longer be managing the resort, but they carry forward the halo effect of a carefully staged exit, an inheritance of story and brand as much as wealth, the great jewelry of the threadbare house. The lesson learned is very simple. Redford used money as a tool rather than as an end goal. By selling Sundance Mountain Resort under his terms, he showed that financial targets and personal sentiment can exist in harmony, leaving behind not just a fortune, but also, just as important, a model for its very construction: sell without surrender, cash out without compromise. If the resort was gone, what exactly did the family stand to inherit? The answer? Elsewhere. The $20 million puzzle. When headlines reported that Robert Redford's property portfolio was worth around $20 million, many paused. How could someone so known for understatement and a distaste for Hollywood excess quietly hold such a vast real estate empire? The answer lies not just in the price tags, but in the pieces of the puzzle. A mountain retreat in Sundance, a rustic cabin, a working ranch, and homes in California and the Napa foothills. Each carried its own story and symbolic weight, together sketching the contours of Redford's fortune. At the heart of it all was his Sundance home, the residence where he spent his final days. Built of wood and stone, it blended into the surrounding forest rather than dominating it. Modest in appearance, its value came from location, Provo Canyon, a place inseparable from Redford's identity and the Sundance brand. On the same acreage sat a smaller cabin, simpler but equally storied. In this case, history, exclusivity, and cultural association elevated properties that might otherwise be considered unassuming. Beyond Utah, Redford's holdings expanded with quiet deliberation. Reports point to a horse ranch, a natural extension of his lifelong connection to the American West. Ranch land carries more than financial value. It carries cultural capital. For a man whose persona was tied to the cowboy archetype, the ranch was more than real estate. It was a lived expression of his on-screen identity. California remained part of the portfolio as well. Redford held a residence there, a practical West Coast anchor close to the industry that shaped his career. In Napa, another retreat reflected his preference for landscapes where environment and lifestyle intertwined. Taken together, the portfolio stretched from mountain to ranch, coast to vineyard, each property reinforcing a facet of Redford's identity. Actor, director, activist, conservationist, family man. On an excellent headline level, the $20 million number is really something. Real estate has as much of an art as a science in valuation. Land with conservation restrictions may be harder to monetize in developing that potential, thus limiting what buyers might pay. With that said, the value of owning Redford land is likely to push bids far above market comps. Depending on one's point of view, that number would qualify as an understatement as well as an overstatement. Luxury inheritance challenges become far more about liquidity than paper value. Property portfolios have costs, taxes, upkeep, people, and rules for conserving. Families who inherit land wealth are often faced with a dilemma: keep it all in tribute or divest pieces to fund upkeep costs. With an emphasis on keeping it, it's likely Redford would say, let it all remain in the same parcel. But practicality has a way of intruding on sentiment when the expense bills come around. Sometimes LLCs are set up by families through which they manage estates, spin off conservation credits, or sell partial interests to aligned partners. That was the case with Redford himself, who made quite a pragmatic decision when he sold Sundance Resort in 2020. Instead of ownership, he traded it for liquidity, ensuring the land stayed protected. His heirs might end up drawing upon similar strategies to balance stewardship and sustainability. Essentially, it is a story worth more than $20 million. The portfolio is a narrative. Each property narrates a part of Redford's story. The Sundance home represents his blending of art and nature. The ranch harks back to his Western roots. Napa and California represent the balance between private life and public career. Now the properties also represent decision points for his family. Do they keep the ranch as a living tribute or sell it to fund new futures? Keep the Sundance cabin in the family or open it as a cultural site? There's more than finance-indulging choices. Rather, legacies are what such decisions determine, not only as to how the Redford estate shall be shaped, but as concerned with whose memory will hold his story. Indeed, this puzzle is of value not just as $20 million, but really in the long run, as it continues or transforms the meaning of Robert Redford's name over the years to come. The land may be priceless to Redford, but the Sundance Institute holds resources with a different kind of power. The institute that outlives the man. When people speak of Robert Redford's legacy, the conversation inevitably circles back to the Sundance Institute. Founded in 1981, it began as a modest experiment for emerging filmmakers and grew into a global force that reshaped cinema. For Redford, it wasn't just an organization. It was his answer to Hollywood's dominance, a sanctuary for voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. Now, with Redford gone, the Institute stands as both a monument to his vision and a living engine that will shape how his influence endures. At its heart, the Sundance Institute is a nonprofit, and that matters. Unlike Redford's private properties or personal wealth, the Institute's assets do not flow to his heirs. Yet the scale is substantial. Recent filings show tens of millions in assets, supported by an endowment that funds programs year after year. It is not family inheritance, it is cultural capital. But because the Redford name is embedded in its very identity, his family will always be tied to its reputation and decisions. The Institute's mission was radical in its simplicity: nurture storytellers outside the Hollywood mainstream. Through labs, residencies, and workshops, it opened doors for those with stories but no access. The results speak for themselves. Quentin Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs; Steven Soderbergh, Sex, Lies, and Videotape; and Damien Chazelle, Whiplash, all emerged through Sundance programs. Each success added prestige, cementing Sundance as the epicenter of independent cinema. Financially, the Institute evolved into a powerhouse. Donors gave generously, corporate sponsors aligned their brands, and the Sundance Film Festival became a global event. Each January, Park City transformed into a cinematic marketplace, where festival passes, sponsorships, and distribution deals generated millions. While the Institute remained a nonprofit, it also became a self-sustaining empire of art. A singular inheritance for the Redford family creates all sorts of problems. They are not in control of the finances of the Institute, but they inherit the obligation of association. Every decision made, from expansion of the festival to its stumbling or reinvention, reflects upon the Redford name. That influence is intangible but real. It shapes opportunities and partnerships, as well as the philanthropic ventures around the family. The Institute is administered, however, very much in accordance with structure. Control is always in the hands of a board of trustees, with all necessary legal and financial safeguards attached to protect donor intent. Endowment funds are stringently earmarked against possible diversion for private ambitions. Thus, this independence ensures that Sundance Institute will survive Redford himself into the foreseeable future and will operate strictly on its own terms. But, at the same time, it also means that Redford's name will be rolling in headlines, articles, and cultural discussions for decades to come. For his heirs, it is a privilege and pressure. Prestige they cannot spend, but a reputation they must bear. The Institute might well be held to be the crowning jewel of Redford's legacy. One not because it gives wealth to his heirs, but because it gives immortality to the brand named Sundance. Properties can be sold, money will be split, but institutions last. With every new filmmaker standing tall through the Sundance program, the influence of Redford continues to grow deeper, and the family name remains cemented with independence and authenticity. So in this sense, perhaps the Institute was the most intended legacy of Redford. This wealth would sustain his family, but the Institute would carry on his vision. It ensures his name as more than an actor, director, or activist, thus far being a cultural architect who created real space for new voices. So who actually gets the wealth that is personal? And how smooth will that handoff be? Heirs, wills, and wildcards. When Robert Redford died, the public remembered his films, activism, and cultural influence. Behind the tributes, though, a quieter story began: the fate of his estate. Wills and trusts rarely dominate headlines, but they quietly determine how fortunes like Redford's are divided, protected, and carried forward. In his case, the balance of heirs, assets, and obligations raises as many questions as it answers. At the center is Redford's widow, Sibylle Sagers, the German-born painter he married in 2009 after years together. Under Utah law and conventional estate practice, a surviving spouse is typically the primary beneficiary unless a will specifies otherwise. Sybil likely inherits the bulk of his estate, properties, accounts, and residual right, either outright or through trusts designed to provide for her while preserving assets for the next generation. Then there are his daughters, Shauna and Amy. Shauna, his eldest, has balanced producing and painting, while Amy has pursued writing and directing, though largely outside the spotlight. With sons Scott and James gone years earlier, Redford's daughters now stand as direct heirs to his creative and personal legacy. Their artistic pursuits may make them especially attuned to decisions about the properties, collections, and brands tied to their father's identity. One overlooked but complex piece of inheritance is art. Redford collected Native American artifacts, contemporary work, and site-specific pieces at Sundance. Unlike real estate, art resists easy valuation. Some works carry immense cultural weight, making them difficult or inappropriate to sell. Others may be tied to tribal agreements or conservation pledges. The family must decide whether to preserve the collection as part of Redford's story, donate to museums, or release select pieces to collectors. Each path carries financial, ethical, and emotional consequences. Royalties present another layer of intrigue. With every airing of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or every streaming of Ordinary People, some income trickles in. While not as dramatic as a ranch or a canyon property, these steady streams of income deserve to be cared for very carefully. Contracts, licensing, and possible dispute. In the long run, these could offer heirs and millions in ongoing income. A reminder that Redford's creative legacy is as much financial as it is cultural. Conservation covenants only complicate matters further. Properties under easements and preservation clauses are bound by obligations, not just privilege. Taxes, maintenance, and compliance costs can morph a multi-million-dollar asset into a liability. Redford may have established trusts or foundations to relieve some of these burdens. If not, his heirs will have to make some awkward choices: uphold the vision at personal expense or liquidate holdings to keep the estate afloat. These realities are very much enlarging the diet of emotional realities. Inheritance has never been mere paperwork. It is memory, it is legacy, and it is identity. Every property of Redford, every painting, and every contract bears more than merely a dollar amount in symbolic weight. Selling a ranch is more than just a transaction. It can end up becoming a headline, a going against the principles for which their dad fought. His heirs inherit not only assets, but the burden of being publicly accountable as well. Ultimately, Redford's family will have to consider within those three: the legal framework, monetary practicality, and emotional legacy. Trusts and wills can provide sayings, but interpretation and execution leave room for different viewpoints. Wildcard: art values, conservation easements, and royalty payments attached to property can alter the meaning of inheritance. And waiting in the wings is the expectation that Redford's would live values as close to Robert's as possible, even while they preserve his wealth. And then there's the part of the fortune you can't fence with a deed: the brand. The empire you can't touch. When people tally Robert Redford's fortune, they tend to focus on numbers: property valuations, royalties, net worth estimate. But perhaps the most powerful part of his legacy is the one that can't be measured on a balance sheet: the Sundance brand. It began as a canyon and a dream, but today it lives as a global symbol of independence, integrity, and artistic courage. Unlike a ranch or a bank account, it isn't something his heirs can simply inherit outright. Yet, in many ways, it may be the most valuable thing he left behind. At its core, Sundance became shorthand for a way of making and consuming art. The Sundance Film Festival is where unknown directors became household names, where tiny indie projects turned into Oscar contenders, and where Hollywood studios looked for the next wave of talent. For filmmakers, a Sundance premiere was not just a screening, it was a coronation. That kind of cultural currency is priceless, and it traces directly back to Redford's decision to build something outside the mainstream. Even beyond film, Sundance became a lifestyle brand. For decades, Redford's name was attached to catalogs, clothing lines, and a rustic aesthetic that consumers associated with authenticity. Architectural digest profiles of his retreat, travel features on the resort, and glossy retrospectives all fed into a perception of Sundance as more than a place. It was an idea, art rooted in land, simplicity, and integrity. That image continues to generate demand, whether for festival tickets, merchandise, or even tourism in Utah. The strange part about this empire is that it doesn't pay heirs directly. The Sundance Institute is a nonprofit. The resort, once sold, no longer sits in the family portfolio. Yet, the brand's halo effect endures. When a filmmaker thanks Sundance in an Oscar speech, or when a travel magazine highlights Redford's Canyon, the Redford family name stays relevant. That relevance opens doors, partnerships, book deals, art shows, and philanthropic ventures that would not exist without the glow of Sundance. This brand power also offers a protective aspect. The family inherits from Robert Redford a certain influence regarding how he is remembered. They will not control the endowment of the Institute, but they certainly can help construct the narrative by controlling access to Redford's papers, letters, or art. They can allow documentaries, lease his likeness, or form foundations carrying his values, to name a few. These acts would not only glorify him, but also ensure that Redford remains culturally significant long after the money is split. One would have to think about how such a non-material legacy may rival or overcome a material legacy. Real estate can be sold. Bank accounts can be drained. Brands, however, if cultivated, can grow. The children and wife of Robert Redford may find that one day the name Sundance avails opportunities beyond anything real estate could provide them. For instance, a future Redford Foundation in partnership with the Institute could one day easily attract numerous donors and partners well beyond the scope of potential real estate sales. Influence, after all, is a kind of wealth. Still, with influence comes responsibility. The Redfords are expected to serve not only property, but values. The world will be looking to see if they respect the environment, speak up for dissenting voices, and conserve. Stray too far, and there could be a dilemma for the brand. Look after it properly, and Sundance enhances its prestige, with the name Redford following close behind. This is ultimately the empire which his heirs inherit. Not just a portfolio of houses and land, but a story, a myth, which has woven its way through American culture. The empire that cannot be felt may perhaps matter the most. For Robert Redford, this was never about cashing in on fame. It was about being part of something larger than himself. For the Redfords, it is not just about how much they should inherit. It is how they carry forward the legacy of Sundance into the future. What do you think is the most important part of Robert Redford's legacy? The fortune, the family, or the brand of Sundance itself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click on the next video appearing on your screen for more untold stories behind Hollywood's greatest legends.